Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going on what is essentially a linguistic archaeological dig. We are going to completely dust off the centuries to examine the anatomy of an absolutely fascinating era, Anglo-Saxon poetry, and the dramatic, really cataclysmic rebirth of the English language. And look, I know what you're thinking, but this isn't just dry, dusty history. It is literally the foundation of the words coming out of my mouth right now.
So here is our roadmap for the dig. We'll start with two worlds in collision, then the genres of Anglo-Saxon poetry, third, the mechanics of Old English, fourth, 1066, the Norman Conquest, and finally, the evolution of English.
Section 1. Two worlds in collision, the cultural soil.
Right, so I want you to imagine a chaotic cultural transition period. You have ancient, deeply rooted pagan tribal life, and it just slams headfirst into early Christianity. Now, to actually understand the people who compose this poetry, we have to look at the social glue holding them all together. That glue was called comitatus. This was a sacred, totally unbreakable mutual bond of loyalty between a generous warlord, who they often called a gold giver, and his retainers or warriors. In a really harsh, violent world, physical bravery and just absolute, unquestioning loyalty to your warlord were literally the highest virtues you could possibly have. It was essentially the ultimate ride-or-die setup.
But there was a much darker, heavier counterpart to all that warlord loyalty, and that was word. Word was this incredibly deep pagan belief in an inescapable, totally blind destiny that completely controls human life. Think about it. You could fight bravely for your warlord all day long, you could do everything right, but ultimately, your fate was already sealed. It paints this incredibly stark picture of the harsh medieval reality, where humans just had to submit to this indifferent destiny, regardless of their actions.
Now, what's really interesting here is the unbelievable tension between these two colliding belief systems. On one side, we've got the pagan beliefs. Word, the pursuit of earthly fame or lof, revenge, endless blood feuds, and chaotic, mindless monsters. And then on the other side, we have Christian beliefs rushing in. Divine providence, eternal salvation, forgiveness, and those same monsters being completely reimagined as literal descendants of Cain or Satan. And the tension really comes from the fact that these oral pagan traditions were eventually written down by Christian monks. These monks basically acted like editors, forcefully weaving messages of salvation and forgiveness right into the middle of these raw, bloody tales of pagan feuds. It's an amazing mashup.
Section 2. Genres of Anglo-Saxon poetry, the artifacts.
So these genres are the actual artifacts we've managed to recover. And it's so absolutely crucial to remember that these stories weren't meant to be read in a quiet library. They were originally vibrant, loud oral performances sung by traveling poets known as scops. Honestly, it is a total miracle we have any of it left to study today. Virtually all the Anglo-Saxon poetry that survives exists only because those Christian monks finally wrote it down centuries later, and they compiled the whole shebang into just 4 major manuscripts. The Exeter book, the Nowell Codex, which is the one that famously contains Beowulf, the Junius manuscript, and the Vercelli book. That's it. That is the entire surviving treasure trove for this whole era.
Within those 4 fragile manuscripts, we find 3 main genres. First up is heroic poetry. This genre completely, unabashedly celebrates the Germanic warrior ethos and tribal loyalty. Since the original pagan worldview offered absolutely no concept of a heavenly afterlife, when you were dead, a warrior's ultimate goal was achieving lof, which translates to immortal fame. And how do you get that? Well, through glorious martial deeds against terrifying monsters, exactly like we see in the epic Beowulf. If you couldn't live forever in heaven, well, your legend was going to live forever in song.
But it definitely wasn't all boasting and monster slaying. Contrast all that high-octane heroic energy with elegiac poetry. These are deeply, deeply melancholic poems. They mourn the loss of a lord, the profound, aching pain of exile, enduring these brutally freezing winter landscapes, and just the fleeting nature of earthly wealth. Poems like The Wanderer capture this pervasive sense of sadness, often documenting the emotional shift from an earthly despair to a newly introduced Christian hope. It's really moving stuff.
Finally, we have religious and scriptural poetry. As the culture shifted, poets boldly started adapting biblical theology into the familiar Germanic heroic verse. Take a poem like The Dream of the Rood. They didn't just passively translate biblical stories, they completely transformed figures like Christ into fierce, heroic warriors, and they painted foreign armies or the devil as these monstrous invaders. It's just a brilliant, fascinating blending of 2 entirely different worldviews.
Section 3. Mechanics of Old English, the technology.
So how did these traveling Scots actually construct these massive, sweeping poems? Because remember, they weren't using modern crutches like end-rhymes or fixed stanzas. Well, the answer is this strict, almost mathematical set of phonetic rules designed to make these oral stories super easy to memorize and chant over the strumming of a harp. Here's how the technology worked. First, the 4-beat line. Every single line contains exactly 4 heavily stressed beats. Second, the caesura. This is a mandatory, sharp pause right in the middle, dividing the line into 2 distinct halves. And third, alliteration. Instead of rhyming at the end of the line, the poet matched consonant or vowel sounds at the beginning of words to act as a kind of sonic glue connecting the 2 halves together.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how that mechanism works in practice. Listen to this excerpt from The Wanderer. Often the alone dweller awaits God's mercy. Or, if we do it in Old English, oft be menod anna ar bedinde. You can practically hear the structure, right? There's that sharp pause right in the middle, that's your caesura, and the O and A sounds in the first half, they link perfectly across that structural pause to the A sounds in the second half. It's like an auditory puzzle piece just snapping perfectly into place.
Speaking of puzzles, my absolute favorite piece of Anglo-Saxon poetic technology is the kenning. A kenning is basically a metaphorical riddle compressed into a compound word. These poets layer deep meaning into their work by literally never just calling a thing by its simple name. Actually, scratch that, it's more like they wanted to show off how clever they were. So they wouldn't say sea, they'd call it a whale road or a seal path. The sun became the sky candle. A sword might be a battle light. It turns every single line into a vivid, imaginative little puzzle for the listener to solve in real time.
Section 4, 1066, the cataclysmic climax.
But as we know, no era lasts forever. Our archaeological dig now brings us to a harsh, brutal historical war. The Anglo-Norman Age violently kicked off with the Battle of Hastings in 1066. Norman King William, the Duke of Normandy, who actually descended from hardy Scandinavian seafarers himself, attacked England and defeated Harold Godwinson. Harold was the very last Saxon king, and with his defeat on that battlefield, the Anglo-Saxon Age, as it was known, came to a sudden, bloody, and permanent end.
Section 5, the evolution of English, the aftermath.
So the crucial point is that this historical collision of cultures birthed the strange hybrid language that we speak every single day. After 1066, an entirely new social and linguistic order was forced upon the land. French became the language of the elite, the upper class, the government, and literature. Latin was completely reserved for the church, law, and high scholarship. And English? Well, Old English was pushed all the way down to the common people, the peasants. Modern English is actually a forced, messy, yet incredibly beautiful combination of those gritty, commoner Saxon roots and the fancy, upper-class French elements imported by the Normans.
Which leaves us with a fascinating final thought for this explainer. Given this violent collision of French and Saxon elements 1,000 years ago, how many ancient kennings, or Old English concepts, are you still unknowingly speaking today? Think about it. The English language isn't just some boring tool you use to order coffee. It's a living, breathing archaeological dig, carrying the literal ghosts of pagan warriors, Christian monks, and Norman conquerors in every single sentence. So keep digging and keep listening to the incredible history hidden right there in your daily vocabulary.